The day Dr. Sarah Mitchell was fired from Riverside General Hospital after 15 years of service, two black military helicopters suddenly descended from the sky and landed in the open field across the street. Minutes earlier, she had been told to her face in a glass office by a man who had never once held a dying child's hand that she was too emotional to be a doctor. She had walked out of that building carrying a small cardboard box. Inside it was a photograph of her 7-year-old son, Noah. Her old stethoscope, the one her mother had given her the day she graduated from medical school, and 15 years of a life she thought she understood. She was 24 years old. She was alone, and she had no idea what was going to happen next. Then the sky roared. The helicopters landed fast and hard, blades cutting the cold morning air. Doors flew open. Uniformed security personnel stepped out and began running directly toward her. People on the sidewalk stopped and stared. A nurse who had just come off her night shift pressed her face against the hospital window. And then one of the men, breathless, reached her and said the 6 words that would change everything. "We have been looking for you." What happened in the next 48 hours would shock the entire country. It would make national headlines. It would bring a powerful man to his knees in gratitude. And it would turn the worst morning of Sarah Mitchell's life into the beginning of something she had never dared to dream. But to understand how she got there, standing in a parking lot with a cardboard box and a broken heart, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to understand who Sarah really was. Sarah Mitchell had never wanted to be famous. She had never wanted wealth or recognition or a corner office with a view. What she had wanted, from the time she was 8 years old and watched her little brother struggle to breathe in a hospital bed while her mother cried in the hallway, was simply this: to make sure no child ever suffered needlessly. That was it. That was the whole dream. She grew up in a small town in rural Tennessee. Her family did not have much. Her father drove a delivery truck, and her mother worked the register at a grocery store on weekends. Money was always tight, but love never was. Her parents had raised her to believe that the measure of a person was not what they earned, but what they gave. Sarah was brilliant. Everyone who knew her said so, though she never believed it herself. She stayed up late studying when others went out. She applied for every scholarship she could find. She worked 2 jobs through college, one at a diner on weekends, one as a library assistant during the week. She ate a lot of peanut butter sandwiches. She never complained. She got into medical school on her own merit. She met Daniel Mitchell in her 2nd year. He was kind and warm, and he made her laugh in the way that mattered, during the hard moments, not just the easy ones. They married quietly the summer before her residency began. No big wedding, just family, a backyard, and a borrowed cake. 2 years later, Noah was born. And 14 months after that, Daniel was gone. A car accident on a Tuesday afternoon. A wet road. A truck that came too fast around a corner. The police officer who came to the hospital, where Sarah was just finishing a 12-hour shift, had taken his hat off before he spoke. She had known what that meant before he said a single word. She did not take time off. She could not afford to. She had an infant son, a mountain of student loans, and a residency that did not pause for grief. So she packed the pain somewhere deep inside herself. Somewhere she could not feel it during surgeries, during rounds, during the moments when she needed her hands to be absolutely steady. She cried on Tuesday nights. Only on Tuesdays. And only after Noah was asleep. By the time she was 23, she was one of the most skilled pediatric surgeons at Riverside General. Her colleagues respected her. Her patients adored her. Parents would specifically request her by name because they said she was the only doctor who looked at their child and not just their chart. She had a gift that no medical school teaches. She saw people, not cases, not diagnoses, not insurance files. People. She saw the frightened mother in the corner of the room trying to appear calm for her child. She saw the father who had driven 4 hours without stopping because he did not trust anyone else. She saw the child who was trying to be brave and did not know that it was okay not to be. And every single time, she told them the truth with kindness. She sat down when everyone else stood. She spoke softly when the room was loud with fear. At home, life was a different kind of hard. She woke at 5 in the morning to pack Noah's lunch before her shift. She called him on her break when she could. She rushed home in the evenings, still in her scrubs sometimes, to heat up whatever she had managed to prepare the night before. She helped with homework at the kitchen table, falling asleep mid-sentence on difficult nights. She read to him before bed, the same 3 books, over and over, because they were his favorites and she had memorized them and could read them even when her eyes were too tired to focus. She did not date. She did not have time. She did not have the emotional space. She had Noah. She had her work. And she had one belief she carried like a compass through every decision she ever made. No child should suffer because of money. Not in her hospital. Not on her watch. That belief had never cost her anything before. Until it cost her everything. His name was Director Gerald Holt. He arrived at Riverside General on a Monday in early November, and by Wednesday morning, every nurse on the floor already knew something had shifted in the air. Holt was 31 years old and had an MBA from a prestigious university. He had never been a doctor. He had never worked in a hospital before. What he had done was turn 2 failing private healthcare companies into profitable ones, and the board of Riverside General, facing rising costs and falling revenues, had decided that was exactly the kind of experience they needed. He was lean and precise in his movements. He wore expensive shoes that clicked on the tile floors. He smiled often, but his eyes did not follow along with his mouth. He called meetings that began on time to the minute. He used phrases like operational efficiency and resource allocation and sustainable margins in sentences where most doctors would have simply said, helping patients. Within his first 2 weeks, Holt had implemented a new early discharge protocol. Patients who were stable enough to leave, by his definition, which was built on a spreadsheet formula, not clinical judgment, were to be discharged faster. Beds turned over more quickly. Revenue per bed increased. On paper, it looked excellent. In the corridors and break rooms, it looked like something else. Nurses exchanged quiet, worried looks. Doctors began documenting more carefully, covering themselves in case anything went wrong. The older physicians grumbled over coffee that no hospital was ever made better by treating it like a hotel. Sarah said very little about Holt publicly. She was not a person who spent energy on politics or power struggles. She showed up. She did her work. She trusted that good medicine would speak for itself. But 3 weeks after Holt's arrival, she admitted a 6-year-old boy named Marcus. Marcus came in with what his parents, a young couple who had driven 2 hours from a small farming community, described as a persistent fever and stomach pain. The family had no private insurance. They were on a state assistance plan that covered basic care but not extensive testing. Sarah examined Marcus, and something in her clinical instinct developed over years of listening carefully to what children's bodies were saying, told her this was not a simple infection. She ordered additional blood panels and an ultrasound. The tests were not standard protocol for the presenting symptoms. They would cost the hospital money that would not be fully reimbursed. The ultrasound found a rare autoimmune condition in its very early stages. Caught then, it was highly treatable. Left another few weeks, it would have caused serious, potentially irreversible organ damage. Marcus went home 10 days later with a treatment plan, a follow-up schedule, and parents who held Sarah's hands in the hallway and could not speak for a long moment. It was the kind of outcome that made Sarah remember every sacrifice she had ever made to become a doctor. 2 days after Marcus was discharged, she was called into Holt's office. He sat behind a large desk. A printed report was open in front of him. He did not stand when she entered. He told her that the testing she had ordered for Marcus had been outside approved protocol, that the additional cost had not been pre-authorized, that decisions of that nature required administrative approval going forward. Sarah listened carefully. Then she said, quietly but clearly, that she had ordered those tests because her clinical judgment told her they were medically necessary, that the child would have been seriously harmed without them, that pre-authorization in that situation would have meant a delay of at minimum 48 hours. Holt nodded patiently. He said he understood her perspective. He said the hospital appreciated her dedication. And then he said that going forward, the financial implications of non-standard care decisions were something all physicians needed to consider carefully. Sarah walked out of that office and sat in the stairwell for 4 minutes. Then she went back to work. She told herself it was a single conversation, that it would be fine, that she had survived harder things than a difficult administrator. She had no idea that the clock had already started. It was a Thursday. Noah had a slight cold that week and Sarah had barely slept, checking on him twice in the night and debating whether to call in before deciding he was well enough for school. And she was needed at the hospital. She had dropped him off at his school, kissed his forehead, watched him walk through the doors. She had sat in her car for 30 seconds longer than she needed to, just watching. Something in her chest felt heavy that morning, She could not explain it. She arrived at the hospital at 6:15. She changed. She checked on her patients. She drank half a cup of coffee that she never finished. At 7:45, her pager buzzed with a message from Holt's assistant. Please come to Director Holt's office at your earliest convenience. She had learned in the weeks since their first meeting that earliest convenience meant immediately. When she entered the office, Holt was not alone. A woman from Human Resources sat to his right. A printed folder was on the desk. Holt gestured for Sarah to sit. He began professionally. He said he wanted to discuss a pattern of behavior that had come to the administration's attention. He listed 3 separate occasions over the past 2 months where Sarah had ordered non-standard tests or extended patient stays beyond protocol without proper authorization. He said that, despite prior conversation on this matter, the pattern had continued. Sarah asked if any of the patients had been harmed. Holt paused. He said that was not the point. Sarah said respectfully that she believed it was precisely the point. He said the hospital had a responsibility to its financial sustainability, that individual physicians could not unilaterally override institutional resource policy, that a pattern of emotionally driven clinical decisions created liability. And then came the phrase that would echo in her head for days afterward. He said she was too emotional to function effectively in a high-stakes clinical environment. The room was very quiet. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Marcus. She thought about the dozens of children whose charts she had memorized, whose names she knew, whose families trusted her. She thought about Daniel, and about Noah sleeping with a stuffy nose in his twin bed, and about every Tuesday night she had cried alone so her son would not carry the weight of her grief. Too emotional. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She said only this, that she hoped the hospital would reconsider its priorities, and that she would always choose the child in front of her over a line on a spreadsheet. Holt nodded once. He said he was sorry it had come to this. The HR representative slid a single piece of paper across the desk. Termination of employment. Effective immediately. 15 years. 1 piece of paper. Less than 10 minutes. Sarah signed where they told her to sign. She asked for a few minutes to gather her belongings. They told her someone from security would escort her to her locker and then to the exit. Hospital policy. She packed the small cardboard box in silence. The stethoscope her mother had given her. A small framed photo of her and Noah from last Christmas, both of them in matching red sweaters, Noah laughing at something she had said right before the picture was taken. A coffee mug that said "World's Okay's Doctor" that the nurses had given her as a joke 3 years ago. She had always loved it. The security officer, a young man named Terrence, who had worked the morning shift for years, who knew her name, who had always nodded "good morning," walked beside her through the corridor without speaking. She understood. He was doing his job. She pushed through the front doors of Riverside General Hospital for what she believed was the last time. The morning air was cold. The sky was a flat, gray-white. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment with her box, not sure which direction to walk. Her car was in the staff lot, but she needed a moment. Just one moment. She thought about calming her mother. She thought about Noah's face. She thought about what she was going to do for money starting today, and whether she could pay next month's rent, and how she was going to explain to a 7-year-old boy why mommy was home in the middle of a Thursday. Then the sound came, low at first, then louder, then enormous. She looked up. 2 black helicopters were descending fast toward the open field across the street from the hospital, the one the maintenance crew sometimes used for overflow parking on busy event days. They were large, serious machines, and they were moving with a purpose that did not belong to this quiet Thursday morning in a small town. People on the sidewalk stopped walking. A delivery driver stepped out of his truck and stared upward. The nurse who had been on break near the entrance pressed herself against the wall. The helicopters landed hard. The rotors were still turning when the doors opened and uniformed security personnel, not police, not military, but clearly professional and organized, stepped out and began moving quickly, scanning the area. One of them was looking directly at her. He was a tall man in a black jacket with a communication piece in his ear. He walked toward her with long, fast strides. Behind him, another man was already on a phone, speaking rapidly. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her badge, still around her neck, because she had forgotten to take it off. He said, "Are you Dr. Sarah Mitchell, pediatric surgeon?" She said, "Yes," he said. "We have been looking for you. We need you to come with us right now. A child's life depends on it." Behind her, through the glass doors of the hospital, she could see Holt standing at the reception desk watching. She did not have time to process what was happening. They moved quickly. One of the security men gently took the cardboard box from her hands and placed it carefully in the helicopter before helping her board. Someone handed her a headset. Someone else gave her a brief that she tried to absorb over the noise of the rotors and the roar of the wind as they lifted off the ground. The boy's name was Eli. He was 8 years old. He was the son of James Whitmore, a name that meant nothing to Sarah in that moment, though she would later learn it meant a great deal to most of the country. James Whitmore had built a technology and logistics company in his mid-20s that had grown into something significant. He was 29 years old, and he was currently sitting in a private surgical facility 40 minutes by air from Riverside, holding the hand of his unconscious son and trying not to fall apart. Eli had been injured 3 days earlier during a family trip. He had fallen during a hike, a bad fall, the kind that looks recoverable and then reveals itself as something far more serious hours later. An internal injury, specifically a rare form of hepatic vascular damage combined with secondary complications that were making the case extraordinarily complex. 3 hospitals had reviewed the case. 3 surgical teams had declined to operate, citing the rarity of the injury, the specific anatomical complications, and the risk profile. 1 hospital had suggested transferring Eli to a research center overseas. The clock was running out. James Whitmore's team had begun searching for any surgeon in the country or beyond who had successfully performed this specific combination of procedures. They had run the medical literature. They had called colleagues. They had searched databases. One name came up, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Riverside General. 2 successful procedures with similar vascular complications, documented in a pediatric surgery journal 3 years earlier. The only surgeon in the northeastern United States with that specific record. They had called Riverside General at 7 in the morning. The hospital had told them Dr. Mitchell no longer worked there. James Whitmore had not accepted that answer. His team located her name, confirmed her credentials, traced her to the hospital address, and dispatched the helicopters within the hour. As the aircraft cut through the cold morning sky, one of the men explained all of this to Sarah over the headset. She listened. She asked clinical questions. The nature of the injury, what imaging had been done, what medications Eli was on, what the timeline of deterioration looked like. The man across from her typed rapidly on a tablet, relaying her questions in real time to the surgical team waiting on the ground. Inside, she was doing something she had trained herself to do in every high-pressure moment. She was becoming still. Not cold. Never cold. But still. There was a place inside her that the fear could not reach when she was working. She had found it during a complicated surgery in her 2nd year of residency, when a child's blood pressure had dropped without warning and everyone in the room had looked at each other for exactly 2 seconds too long. She had simply moved forward, quietly and precisely, and afterward the senior surgeon had pulled her aside and said he had never seen anything like it. She did not think about the hospital. She did not think about Holt. She did not think about the termination paper still folded in the pocket of her coat. She thought about Eli. 8 years old. She pictured him as she did every child, small and real and specific, not a case, a person. A boy who had favorite foods and a way he held his pencil and a show he watched before bed that made him laugh. A boy whose father was currently trying to breathe through something no parent should ever have to face alone. The helicopter descended toward a private medical facility she had never seen before. It was immaculate and well-equipped, better equipped than Riverside General, she noted without judgment. A surgical team was assembled and waiting on the landing pad. Someone handed her a surgical gown before her feet fully touched the ground. In the scrub room, washing her hands with practiced rhythm, she looked at herself in the mirror for just a moment. 1 hour ago, she had been standing on a sidewalk with a cardboard box, wondering how she was going to pay rent. Now, a family's entire world was waiting for her on the other side of a door. She dried her hands. She pushed through the door. The surgery lasted 6 hours and 19 minutes. Sarah would not remember all of it afterward in a linear way. She would remember it the way you remember any intense experience, in fragments and sensations and specific moments that burn themselves into her memory with unusual clarity. She remembered the way the room felt absolutely quiet when she made the first incision. She remembered the moment, about 90 minutes in, when Eli's heart rate dropped suddenly, and the anesthesiologist called it out in a voice that was carefully controlled but carried an edge beneath it. She remembered not pausing, not hesitating, simply adjusting, redirecting, working her way through the problem with the methodical calm of someone who has spent years learning that fear is a luxury you set aside and collect later. She remembered the second scare, near the 4-hour mark, when the blood loss became more significant than anticipated, and two members of the surgical team exchanged a look over their masks. She caught it. She said, quietly but clearly, what the next 3 steps were going to be. Not a question. A plan. The team moved. She remembered thinking about Noah during one of the slower, more delicate passages of the procedure, one that required a level of precision that demanded she slow her breathing and trust her hands completely. She thought about the way he sometimes reached up and took her hand when they were walking somewhere, without saying anything, just because he wanted to. She let that thought make her steadier, and she remembered the moment, clear and unmistakable, when everything turned. Eli's numbers stabilized. Slowly, then more firmly. The bleeding was controlled. The repair held. The vascular reconstruction that 3 other surgical teams had called too risky had been completed with the kind of quiet precision that the senior nurse in the room would later tell a journalist she had only seen twice in 30 years of assisting in operating rooms. When it was over, Sarah stepped back and let the team begin closing. She walked out of the operating theater and stood in the scrub room and turned on the faucet and let the water run over her hands for a long time. She was not sure what she felt. It was not triumph. It was not relief exactly. It was something quieter and deeper than either of those things. It was the feeling that she had done what she was made to do, that the day, despite everything that had happened in it before this moment, had been exactly what a day was supposed to be. She dried her hands again. She walked out to find James Whitmore. He was standing in the corridor outside the waiting room, still in his jacket. He had clearly been pacing. When he saw her face, before she said a single word, he put one hand over his mouth and turned away for a moment. She said, "He came through. He's going to need time to recover, and I want to walk you through the care protocol carefully, but the surgery was successful." James Whitmore sat down on the floor, not in a chair. On the floor, right there in the hallway of the surgical facility. This young man who ran a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars sat down on the tile floor and put his face in his hands and wept. Sarah crouched beside him. She did not say anything for a minute. She simply stayed there, because she knew something that no MBA program and no board meeting and no efficiency report would ever teach Gerald Holt. Sometimes presence is the most powerful medicine. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red and his face was completely open, all the composure stripped away, and he looked exactly like what he was, a father who had nearly lost his child. He said, "How do I thank you for this?" She said, "Go see your son." Sarah did not release the story. She went home, picked Noah up from school. He was confused but delighted by the early pickup and immediately began telling her about a frog he had seen at recess, and she made pasta for dinner and gave him a bath and read him his books and tucked him in. She did not call a journalist. She did not post anything. She did not speak to anyone beyond confirming the surgery's success to the private facilities team. But 23 people had been involved in those events. Helicopter crews, security personnel, hospital administrators at Riverside who had seen the aircraft land across the street, nurses at the private facility, and eventually, inevitably, a medical community that talks. By Friday morning, a single post appeared on a nursing forum. By Friday afternoon, it had been picked up by a local news outlet. By Friday night, it was national. The headline in various forms was the same everywhere. Single mother doctor, fired for caring too much, saves billionaire son hours later. Sarah sat on her couch Friday evening and watched the coverage with a kind of disoriented calm, the way you might watch a storm through a window, aware of its force, grateful for the glass between you. Former patients appeared on camera. A mother whose daughter Sarah had treated 3 years earlier, who said Sarah had sat with her for 2 hours after the surgery just to make sure she understood everything and felt safe. A father who said Sarah had called his family on a Sunday, her day off, to check on his son after discharge. A teenage boy, now healthy, who had been one of Sarah's first complex cases and who said she had written him a letter when he was scared before his surgery, telling him that brave did not mean unafraid. Nurses from Riverside General began speaking anonymously to reporters. They described the new protocols. They described what it felt like to watch care decisions be filtered through a financial lens. Several of them cried on camera. Hospital administrators across the country began commenting. Medical ethics boards issued statements. Patient advocacy organizations called press conferences. And in the middle of all of it, Gerald Holt issued a short, carefully worded statement that used the phrase, difficult institutional decisions 3 times, and said nothing of substance. It did not go well for him. The board of Riverside General convened an emergency session the following week. It would take another month for the full outcome to be determined, but the direction was already clear. Through all of it, Sarah said nothing publicly. Not because she was afraid, not because she was bitter, but because she was genuinely not sure what she wanted to say. Her life had been upended, and then upended again within the space of a single morning, and she was still sitting in the middle of it trying to find solid ground. She had lost her job. She had no income. She had a son and a rent payment and a stethoscope in a cardboard box. But every evening that week, when Noah came and climbed into her lap and asked her to read to him, she felt something she had not expected to feel. Peace. Not the absence of problems, the presence of something that ran deeper than problems. A kind of steady, quiet knowing that she had not compromised. That on the morning when everything had asked her to be smaller than she had chosen to be exactly herself. And the world, complicated and strange and often unjust as it was, had noticed. On Sunday evening, her phone rang. It was James Whitmore's assistant. She would like very much, the assistant said with careful formality, if Dr. Mitchell would be willing to meet with the Whitmore family at her earliest convenience. Sarah looked at Noah, who was at the kitchen table with a coloring book, his tongue between his teeth in concentration. She said she was available Tuesday. The Whitmore family did not arrive in helicopters this time. They arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a single, quiet car. James Whitmore came with his wife, Clara, and their son, Eli, who was pale and moving carefully, but alive and present, and holding a drawing he had made at the facility during his recovery. He walked up to Sarah's front door and held it out to her without saying anything. It was a drawing of a helicopter, slightly lopsided, with 2 stick figures inside. One small, one taller, and the word Diocitor printed in large, uneven letters across the top. Sarah took it with both hands. She put it on the refrigerator immediately, right next to Noah's drawings of dinosaurs and racing cars, and when Noah came in from the backyard and saw Eli, the 2 boys regarded each other for a moment in the silent way that children evaluate strangers. And then Noah said, "Do you want to see my Legos?" And Eli said, "Yeah." And that was that. The adults sat at the kitchen table. James Whitmore was different here than he had been in the hallway of the surgical facility. He was still clearly exhausted. The past week had carved something in his face that was not fully gone, but he was composed. He sat with his hands flat on the table, and he spoke simply and directly, which Sarah found she respected. He said he wanted to thank her. He said that thank you was not a complete enough phrase for what he felt, but that he was going to say it anyway and mean it completely, and then he was going to say something else. Sarah waited. He said he had spent the past week, in the hours when Eli was sleeping and recovering, thinking about what had happened, not just to his son, but to her. He had made inquiries. He had read everything he could find about the situation at Riverside General. He had spoken to 3 of the nurses who had gone on record anonymously. He said what had happened to her was wrong, and then, carefully, clearly, looking at her directly, he said he wanted to do something about it. He did not want to offer her money. He said he understood that was not what this moment called for. What he wanted to propose was this. His foundation had been looking for a meaningful project, something with a specific purpose and a measurable impact. He had the resources to build something real, and he had been waiting for the right thing to build. He wanted to fund a world-class children's medical center, not somewhere abstract or far away. Here, in this town, where the families were. Where the need was real and local and unmet. A facility where no child would be turned away, where the care protocol would be built on clinical need, not financial authorization. Where the mission statement would be written first and the balance sheet would be made to serve it. He wanted to know if she would lead it. Not just as a surgeon, as the director of the entire center. The person who set the culture, who built the team, who decided what the place stood for. He said he had asked around. Everyone he spoke to said the same thing. She was the only person he could imagine trusting with it. The kitchen was very quiet. Noah's voice floated in from the other room, explaining something about a Lego spaceship with great urgency. Sarah looked at her coffee cup. She looked at the drawing on the refrigerator, the lopsided helicopter, the word Detour in crooked capital letters. She looked at James Whitmore, who was watching her with an expression that was patient and genuine and entirely without pressure. She thought about Marcus and his early test results. She thought about the family who had driven 2 hours and trusted her. She thought about the nurses who had gone quiet in hallways rather than argue about discharge timelines. She thought about every parent who had ever sat in a hospital room wondering whether their child was getting less because they had less. She thought about the Tuesday nights, about the stethoscope in the cardboard box, about a glass office and a piece of paper and 10 minutes that had ended 15 years. She thought about what she had told Holt on that last morning. "I will always choose the child in front of me." She said yes. That evening, after the Whitmores had gone and the boys had said a careful and slightly awkward goodbye that ended with Eli saying, "See you later," and Noah saying, "Yeah, probably," Sarah sat on the porch steps. The night was cool and clear. The kind of night that feels like it is asking you to pay attention. Noah came and sat beside her. He was in his pajamas, which meant he had already done it himself, which he was very proud of these days. He leaned against her arm. She told him everything, the way she always told him things, in simple, honest language, without pretending the hard parts had not happened. She told him that she had lost her job, and it had hurt. She told him that she had been scared. She told him that she had gone and helped a little boy anyway, even when she was scared, and that something good had come from it that she had not been able to see coming. She told him that she was going to build a hospital where children could always get help, no matter what. Noah was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Will you still tuck me in at night?" She pulled him close. She said yes. She promised. He seemed satisfied. He yawned. He said the hospital should have a good toy room. She said she would make sure of it personally. She carried him inside. She tucked him in. She sat beside him until his breathing slowed. Then she went to the kitchen table and sat with a notepad and a pen, and she began writing down, in her careful and particular handwriting, everything she believed a children's hospital should be. 9 months later, the Mitchell Children's Medical Center opened its doors. The building was beautiful in the way that buildings are beautiful when someone thought carefully about the people who would move through them. Wide windows, natural light, hallways with color and art, a toy room that Noah had personally approved, a garden courtyard where children who were well enough could sit in the sun. Families came from across the region, then across the state, then, for specific complex cases, from much further. The staff were extraordinary because Sarah had built the team herself, one careful conversation at a time, choosing people who chose the mission. No child was turned away, not one. The financial model James Whitmore had helped structure made sure of it. On the day the center opened, Sarah stood at the front entrance in the early morning before the first families arrived and looked at the building for a long time. The sign above the door, the wide steps, the garden off to the left, where a small fountain made a sound like a gentle argument with itself. She thought about the morning she had walked out of Riverside General with a cardboard box. She thought about how that morning had felt like an ending so complete and final that she had not been able to see past it to the next minute, let alone the next year. And she understood something she had heard many times, but only now fully knew in her body, in the way you only know things you have actually lived through. The day she thought she had lost everything was the day her life truly began. Not because loss was good. Loss was real and it hurt, and it left marks that did not fully disappear. But because she had met loss with honesty, with courage, with refusal to become less than she was. And the world, which is sometimes cruel but is also sometimes watching for exactly that kind of person, had answered. This is the story of Dr. Sarah Mitchell. But in truth, it is the story of something larger than one woman's remarkable journey. It is a story about what happens when we refuse to let the world make us smaller. Sarah was not superhuman. She was tired and afraid, and some nights she did not know how she was going to manage. She had grief. She had never fully finished carrying. She had bills and a 7-year-old and a job that took everything she had. What she had that could not be taken from her, not by a termination letter, not by a man in a glass office, not by the worst morning of her adult life, was her belief, her clear, uncompromising belief that every child mattered. That kindness was not weakness. That doing the right thing when it was costly was still, always, the right thing. She did not plan the outcome. She did not know the helicopters were coming. She did not perform surgery to be vindicated or to prove a point or to make someone regret their decision. She did it because there was a child who needed her. That is all. And sometimes, not always, not in every story, but sometimes that is enough. That willingness to show up fully for the person in front of you, regardless of what the morning has already taken from you, regardless of who is watching or not watching or keeping score. Sometimes that is the single decision that changes the direction of your life. Faith carried Sarah when the math did not add up. Perseverance kept her moving when there was no visible reason to. Kindness, the specific, practiced, costly kind of kindness that is not a feeling but a choice, was the thing that made every other thing possible. To everyone watching this who has been told you are too much, too sensitive, too caring, too slow, too small, you are not. The world has a long and consistent history of being wrong about that. Keep going. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Darryl Gold Stories and turn on notifications, because the next story might change your perspective on love.